Hello and welcome to our 17th show, believe it or not. So today I have the pleasure of interviewing a very interesting gentleman, Bobak Tavangar, who is the founder and CEO of Brilliant Labs, a company that has made significant inroads into the world of augmented reality through its development of an open source augmented reality glasses hardware platform. The company has attracted significant investment, including from prominent figures such as Adam Chayar, co-founder of Siri, and Brendan Ireb, co-founder of Oculus VR. Bobak's approach to AR is unique, and it's focused on integrating advanced vision capabilities into glasses. Really interesting stuff. Before founding Brilliant Labs, Bobak ventured into the AR space with two startups on developing computer vision software with AI for existing hardware platforms, before most of us were looking at this stuff. Despite the challenges in these ventures, his passion for AR technology persisted, leading to his eventual establishment of Brilliant Labs in Hong Kong in 2019, which later moved to Singapore. So the interesting thing about this interview or this conversation with Bobak was that he approached me, and he's not the first entrepreneur to approach me to get on the program, which is a great accolade for us. But generally, I've always said no to these because I don't see this as a platform for advertising. But Bobak really came open-heartedly and was really interested in just having the conversation. And my sense was that this potentially could be something interesting, and it certainly was. He's a very intelligent and articulate human being. What he's doing, I think, is important and very interested in the space. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Bobak Tavangar. I don't have an agenda on where it goes. I'm kind of let the gods do their thing, and kind of very interested to dig into kind of the world that you're operating in, and I guess what's different here is, to date, I've been interviewing a cross-section of people, so entrepreneurs who are kind of in flight, who I know about, who have got them through, I know them through my network, and I know they've got interesting stories. And I've had a couple of other approaches from international. What's international for me? So it's people outside Australia who's going, hey, I want to get on. And you're the first one I said okay to, because I kind of just immediately kind of picked up that you kind of were coming at this, pretty open-heartedly, and just wanted to kind of, fly the kite and see if this is, if this is good for you, and, hopefully good for us too. And so I was happy to kind of roll the dice on it. So that's kind of the pre-brief. I might even include some of that in the intro, because I'm recording now. But look, welcome, Bobak. Thank you for reaching out. It's nice to meet you. How are you?
Likewise. Thanks for having me, Peter. I'm doing pretty well.
It looks like it by the stuff that I'm reading about you. I'm very interested to understand a little bit more about how you got to where you got to, and what you're doing now. I think the space is really, obviously it's still fledgling, but it's, there seems to be an open source component to what you're doing. And but maybe we start off with just telling us a little bit about yourself. And before I go ahead, and I've got a sneaking suspicion you've got Persian heritage.
That's right.
Okay, just fun fact, my nephew is half Persian, so we've got Greek heritage. My sister married a Persian chap who escaped from Iran on the back of a motorbike in the 80s, through Afghanistan and whatnot. I'm very proud of my nephew Shah, who just got married and is on track to become a barrister. I don't know what the equivalent is in the States, but I presume you know. So it's quite a successful young guy. So I know a spattering of Persian words, but I won't embarrass myself on this. But at least I got in front of this unique name that you've got. Well, go ahead.
Well, and that's it's an interesting segue, because to give a little background on myself, and I usually don't focus on my Persian heritage, but something that I have come to appreciate, and this does tie into my line of work. Persian culture very much celebrates the coming together of the arts and technology, engineering, the sciences, And in fact, there's a rich lineage in Persian culture of invention across both of these
Really?
two systems of knowledge. Yeah, across the sciences, and then, invention in the engineering world, incredible legacy in the Persian Empire. And then, of course, in the arts, whether it's, poetry or handicrafts, there's just so much rich, pottery, a lot of modern pottery we have to thank from, Persian Empire innovation there, and how that propagated over the Silk Road. And so there's a lot of coming together of the arts and technology that really inform how I think about, in this modern day, as a modern Persian trying to do something great in the world,
Right.
how I think about innovation.
That's
So
it.
it's a good segue.
That's really interesting. Shahin, my nephew, made his own rings. He melted the gold and made his own rings. It kind of touches on what you're talking about. He's very much a DIY type of guy. He wants to get involved and understand how everything works specifically. Yeah, it's very, very interesting. So so tell us a little bit about, like, I kind of did a little bit of background. You've got a unique sort of educational background, but before we get on to your business, maybe talk a little bit about kind of, your education. You work for Microsoft, you work for Apple, I believe, if I got my stuff right. Maybe talk a little bit about that, and then tell us how you got to your business. Where did that come from? Where did that opportunity come from?
Yeah, and stop me if I'm sort of blathering here, but I started in the U.S., of course, born and raised outside Philadelphia. Did my undergraduate in Washington D.C. Very much an economics and international affairs buff. So I and still am, very interested in how the political economy of the world fits together like a jigsaw puzzle, an evolving jigsaw puzzle, and just really trying to understand that, not just in terms of institutions, but also culture and people, how these things affect each other. So, and in fact, now that I look back, when I was younger, I think I probably put too much weight on the power of institutions. But the older I've become, especially since I've become a father, I've become more aware of the power of culture and relationships, and the importance of that in shaping, the how things unfold on the world stage. So that really was where I started. I went to grad school in the UK at Cambridge University, and Cambridge, like Oxford, it's like a modern Hogwarts. I was amazed that places like that still existed in the world. It was so wonderful, and every evening I was dining with people who were diving deep into different disciplines, biophysics and poetry and theater and choir and song and computer science, all of us sitting together every single night. And it became sort of a cross-pollination of knowledge across disciplines. And that really affected my interest at that age. And they started to broaden. I started to think more intentionally about what it was to be a human being, what it was to have reference points of knowledge, and identity that touched many different aspects of human existence, and therefore how to orient one's career. And I started to think about, okay, well, there's a few things that amplify the human being and who and what we are. One of them, of course, is education and how we're taught to think. One of them is technology, and one of them is faith. So I zeroed in on these three things. It might not be an exhaustive list, but that's sort of where my mind was at the time. I, for whatever reason, I never felt like I would be a very effective educator. I loved being educated, but I just doubted my own ability to be useful to, a young mind or a classroom of young minds. So I quickly turned my attention over to faith. And you might have come across this as well in your own research. So I'm a practicing Baha'i, member of the Baha'i faith.
As is my family, that side of the family, by the way.
Oh,
So it was a Baha'i
okay.
ceremony. I had a suspicion it might be. I'm a card-carrying atheist, but I have some wonderful. And look, I definitely believe the universe is intelligent. How you want to frame that, it's up to you. But yeah. So look, you're in safe hands here, mate.
Beautiful. Well, so and then you probably know, the Baha'i faith is a very inclusive sort of world embracing faith. It really espouses this notion that the earth is one country and mankind is citizens. That it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, what you look like, what language you speak. All of us are brothers and sisters. We believe from the same creator. So, all that's to say, I draw a lot from my faith, but I kind of had that second bucket checked, or the second box checked, and so that left me with technology, which had become an increasing interest of mine. By that point, I'd spent time at Microsoft, their research center in Beijing, and I started to appreciate how you could write a line of code and distribute that to 1 billion people at near zero marginal cost, and it could fundamentally transform how they saw themselves and their place in the world, how they connected with others, or how they accessed knowledge and information. And and it remains today, it's just such a magical phenomenon. The closest thing to magic that I think all of us have access to since our ancestors first discovered fire. And we're playing with it every single day, either as creators or as passive recipients of that magic. And so that's how I decided I wanted to orient my career.
Okay, fantastic. And so at what point did, I guess, I mean, I obviously I deal a lot in that kind of that segue between, sitting on the couch and, light bulb pops up. So when did that happen for you? I believe you had a couple of ventures that didn't necessarily, work. And look, they're the greatest educators of all, right? So maybe tell us a little bit about that, and then you take us into this venture with the Monocle that you're working on.
Yeah, well, I've always, for better or worse, I've been prone to the lightning bolt sort of, starting pistol phenomenon as an entrepreneur. So my first company, out of graduate school, it was a lightning bolt that hit me while I was in a lecture at Cambridge, and decided that I was going to not do my PhD. I'd already been admitted to do a PhD at that time, so I'm set to stay at Cambridge for at least the next 3-4 years. But I decided instead to say no to that and do a company instead. You're right. You learn a lot. You learn a lot about people management. You learn a lot about how to get your arms around a big idea and execute on that in a disciplined way. We could spend probably an entire conversation just diving deep into what you learned in a venture, but suffice to say, that didn't work out after a couple of years. We took a lot of the core technology, some of the team, and our investors, and pivoted to something new. So we started our next venture. That, after a number of years, ended in an acqui-hire situation. A soft landing, you could call it.
Yep.
Some of our team joined the larger company, and I went to Apple. It was through that journey, maybe before I get into the Apple side of things, it was through the journey of running these companies that I wrapped my mind increasingly around what they call graph databases. So graph data, which is not seeing data in rows and columns the way that a lot of databases or even Excel spreadsheet present data, but instead seeing data in the context of their relationships.
Right.
So, think about a schoolyard of friends. It's more about seeing how the friends are related to each other. Who is more popular and more sought after, who's on the periphery of that friend network, and how does that evolve over time? So being able to understand and query data in terms of its relationships, fascinating. And I believe the world is very much organized like a graph, a giant global graph. That's, all things are connected. And at the same time, diving deeper into artificial intelligence, machine learning, specifically computer vision. So how AI is applied to single frame or multiple frames that a camera pulls in, and then tries to analyze those things, recognize and understand what it's seeing, and then deliver that output to a user. So these sort of two themes continued to recur, and just my fascination increased. But I hit a certain point in my last company where we were playing with AR technology. We were just sort of experimenting with it. There were early SDKs available at the time, especially one from a company called Wikitude, another from a company called Metaio, which was later acquired by Apple. And it was all sort of available in a phone. And I remember walking around Hong Kong at that time. I was living in Hong Kong, and sort of holding my phone up in front of my face, looking around. And on one hand, I was like, wow, this is really cool. I can look at the city through the screen, and I can see elevated information and context that are not apparent to my own eyes. This is really cool. But at the same time, who wants to walk around
Right.
with their hand awkwardly in front of their face? And there's latency issues and occlusion issues, and so it clearly was not ready for prime time. And it got me really, it was the first time I remember this sort of feeling that um, the maturity of the smartphone and sort of that incarnation of computing, that maybe we're starting to bump up against the sides of the parameters of this thing, that perhaps we're beginning to outgrow. We're like, again, a lot of my references now, because I have young kids, they're like baby references.
Yep.
We're starting to outgrow diapers.
Right.
That we're ready for what's next, and that's a good thing. So I became really interested in AR, but specifically AR hardware.
Right.
And Apple obviously is very interested in that area. Google, Facebook, or Meta, as they're now known.
Google had Google Glass, which they put a bullet through.
That's it. That's right. That's right. And that I remember I was in grad school and I saw that demo in 2012, their big glass announcement, and that captivated me. I mean, that was amazing, that
Right.
announcement. And they eventually, they put a bullet in it, had all these privacy concerns, but that stuck with me. I was like, wow, computing in front of the eye, helping you see a reality that's not readily apparent, based purely on what's physically in front of you. That is, I mean, to take this notion of magic, like that is the next leap in how this stuff is magical in our lives. And so that got me on this journey of thinking about AR hardware and how that might one day manifest in each of our lives.
So at that point, I'm interested in the journey. So at that point, did you go, right, okay, I'm going to incorporate a company. I'm going to start writing a business plan. I've got an R&D piece. So is that what you did? Or did it come to you and you know what, I think I've got a business here?
Yeah. So it's interesting. What's funny is I had this feeling at the tail end of my previous company, but the company was not, I didn't know anything about doing hardware at that time. None of my colleagues did. We were all software people. And I remember thinking, okay, I have this feeling of, we are collectively starting to perhaps outgrow the confines of the phone, but I don't, I'm sure there are going to be large companies that have a lot of money and an army of incredibly talented people who are going to solve this problem. And so at that point, wow, I can't wait to see what they all cook up. This is exciting. And fast forward a couple of years, a company called Magic Leap.
Yeah.
If you remember them, they launched a device. They'd been in stealth for a long time. People were rumors about how amazing their stuff was, and they released their Magic Leap One, their first headset. And I think it's safe to say that it didn't quite capture the popular imagination the way that the hype had promised it might. And at that, from that moment on, it was just this like downward cascade for the AR industry collectively. There were a bunch of other companies, and I think people started to like it's actually kind of looking back fascinating. When Magic Leap belly flopped on their first device, after raising $5 billion or something and having an army of people working away at it for years, almost every other AR company that was similarly overhyped, bubbles started to pop. So there were a few of them went out of business in succession, despite raising tremendous amounts of money and having talented people and a lot of hype. And AR entered a bit of a winter. And, there were all these rumors, but wow, so Google's put a bullet in their thing. All these AR startups were popping or going out of business in front of our eyes. Apple's rumored to be working on something, but we don't know what that's going to be or when that's going to come out. And there was sort of nothing in the interim. Microsoft was plugging away at the HoloLens, but that was like $3,000+ and heavy on the head. It wasn't something mass market ready. And so it was at that point I was already at Apple, and I started to see this sort of broader, this macro, context unfold. And I started to think less as a consumer and more as a potential creator, a designer of a device like this.
Can I interrupt you there, Bobak? Sorry, mate. You said a couple of things that are really, really interesting there, which I'm going to comment on. Interestingly, it surprises me still that the expectation is, and correct me if I'm mishearing you, I apologize in advance, but that the expectation is that the big end of town is going to innovate. So, that Apple or Microsoft or Google or whatever have got the DNA, because they did come out of a garage and they did innovate in their first incarnations. And, and Apple did some amazing things later, but they still had Steve Jobs at the helm, right? But once you go across the Rubicon and you become this big machine, your DNA is not to innovate. Your DNA is to protect, right? You might take some strategic, unless you've got a gun to your head, like if you have, Boeing had an interesting story where they bet the farm on 747. All right. So if the 747 wasn't going to be successful, they were gone. So unless they were, but that's generally not the way, shareholders and, board of directors. So that's my first comment. It sounded clearly intelligent human being like yourself. You still expected that these enterprises are going to bring you, bring you the stuff when unlikely based on historical evidence. So that's my first point. The other point, slightly different. Who was the company that raised $5 billion? I know this happens. Sometimes they raise some big numbers. Whoever that was, it astounds me that the normal maths of economics is, okay, I'm gonna drop $1 million into your business. I've got a 5-year horizon. If I triple my money over 5 years, I'm a happy guy. Right? $5 billion.
Yeah.
$5 billion. You better be thinking. You're thinking about some big ROI, dude. I just don't understand it at that end of town where they think we're going to drop $5 billion into this thing and we're going to allocate that capital efficiently. Anyway, that's more of a comment than a question than anything else. But both of those were really comments. So, so it's interesting that you kind of found yourself being the thinking, I think maybe I got to do this myself.
Yeah, well, and you're exactly right. I mean, to your first point, I think it was because it was and is a hardware problem fundamentally, and hardware is very hard, very expensive, long lead times, and it's the kind of thing that only a handful of companies have really demonstrated an ability to do hardware well, and so that's if you look at software. I think my assumption was, hey, software is so liquid and so democratized. The tools, the skill set to be able to spin up software and distribute that to a lot of people tomorrow. A small company of a couple folks can disrupt a whole industry with software. But hardware, different animal. But also because in this space, the way that they were trying to go about doing it, and this was where I'll get into this in a second, but this is where our sort of very differentiated insight came. They were trying to reinvent the wheel across a range of core hardware technologies that entailed hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, and an army of PhDs and years of deep research and development. That's always very risky, and it's certainly the kind of risk that only large tech companies can afford to make. Or a company like Magic Leap, which had raised a few $billion and ultimately didn't have a terrible amount to show for it in terms of usable product. But you're absolutely right. It's otherwise it's not necessarily the big companies that are delivering the most exciting innovation. And this recent, the past year's wave of AI companies which have emerged and are changing our world all over again. That's evidence of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So take us into Brilliant Labs and this first product, and I'm going to try and understand it better, and I guess in a way kind of put my investor hat on to what the traction is in terms of getting those first use cases, because you mentioned Magic Labs and these various companies who come up with this wonderful thing. But market fit's not there. The pricing's not there. The capability to produce it, as in to manufacture it in volume, to be able to to get it to market, even though it goes Bing. But can you deliver the thing? So introduce us to Brilliant Labs and talk to us about your product.
Yeah, well, we started Brilliant Labs. So after I left Apple, again, I had a bit of a lightning bolt moment, and fortunate that my wife is very encouraging. We had a 1-year-old at the time. My son was 1, and she could clearly see that this idea was bouncing around my head, and she was very encouraging and said, "Look, you should explore this. You should pursue this. Otherwise, I know you'll be miserable looking back, and that you never took the shot." So very fortunate to have I think that makes a huge difference to have an encouraging
critical, absolutely critical.
Yeah, absolutely. So joined up with my co-founders. We started off with sort of sketches on a napkin, a lot of debates around form factor, what wasn't working, what ought these devices be used for. We really questioned the assumption that these devices should even exist, because all of us have these great screens and computing devices in our lives, multiple screens all the time. Why do we need one more? What's the purpose for this thing's existence?
I have 4, by the way, 4 in front of me at the moment.
Oh, exactly. I've got.
That's not including the phone.
So, and I think that's par for the course. So why do you need another screen? And I think the insight that we landed on that early on was, okay, this thing needs to be really light. It needs to be all in one. To date, a lot of the other devices, they've been bulky, expensive, and there's been a big wire coming out of the back that hooked into a side-mounted thing or your phone and drained your phone's battery in an hour. And still, a lot of those devices are characterized like that. But we said, okay, it has to be wireless. It has to be super lightweight. It has to fit in your pocket. So it needs to feel like a trinket, something that you sort of covet. And we really referenced the AirPods heavily in those early days, where it's just this little sort of, like a clamshell from the ocean with a pearl inside, and you just, it's delightful to carry with you, and it's beautiful to the touch, and you value it. So we knew it needed to feel like that. But most importantly, we knew it couldn't be something that just brought console-grade graphics in front of your eyes, because first of all, we struggled to really see the use case there. We think it makes for great like gimmicky YouTube videos and like ads, and that's what those companies at that time were pushing onto the mass market and captivating the mass imagination with. But we
that's a Tom Cruise moment on what was it? What was the movie? I can't remember the name of the movie where he had
that's
what I'm talking about.
Yes. Where he's sort of shifting the screens around blanking on the name of them. But yeah, that's exactly right. People wanted that experience, and maybe at some point in the future, we will have that in a way that looks good, feels good, is priced right. But it's not, not now. We can't force the physics just for the sake of pursuing that. So we really questioned what it should be for, and where we landed on was we need to start planting the seeds for a co-pilot in your life, because there's going to be things that you hear, things that you see, information available on the web that is relevant to the life you're living in that moment. But number one, your brain's not hooked up to the web. And number two, we don't always catch. In fact, you can count on us not catching most of what we see and hear, consciously or right?
For sure. We couldn't process that much information.
That's right. And so to have a co-pilot which sees and understands your reality and is elevating, an intelligence that elevates useful information to you in that moment where it's actionable, and at some point even executes on tasks for you, to help you get more done in a given moment. We thought that was a much more compelling path and justified the existence of these technologies, of a device like this. So that's the path we're on. Brilliant Lab.
Have you got a use case that you could provide to sort of give us an idea? Because I keep on imagining the temperature. I can see the temperature, right, but I'm sure it's probably more than that.
No, that's right. Right now, today, so We do devices like, Monocle is the first to market. We're going to be announcing one next week. That'll be sort of the next big leap forward for us, which we're quite excited about. And they interface with a suite of generative AI products. So an example of that might be the Whisper model to do simultaneous translation. So you're walking down the street, let's say you're in Hong Kong, someone is speaking Cantonese, you would see English subtitles right in front of your eyes, holographically displayed. GPT-4, which was announced by OpenAI and will be in public release very soon, that through a pair of glasses would enable you to, look at a rash on your hand and get a provisional diagnosis. I hesitate to use the word diagnosis, but a provisional assessment by the model of what this is, and perhaps even a home remedy that you can put together, or something you could buy from the nearby pharmacy to treat that rash.
Right.
Or again, because I've got young kids, your kid is keeping you up through the night because they have a bad cough, a chest cough. The microphones would be able to hear that, pick out certain elements of the audio, and similarly, GPT-4 would be able to elevate, a response that, hey, this sounds like RSV, it's running rampant in your area, and you should go take your kid to the doctor tomorrow. So,
okay.
And then maybe one more that I'm really excited about is AI web search. So there's a company called Perplexity. We tap into some of their services, and wearing a device, you could walk down the street, look at a restaurant, and just ask, what reviews does this place get? And what are people saying they do really well? What should I get if I go there? And this large language model can take snippets of a precise response from the whole web. That could include Yelp, it could include Google, anything, a blog, and they could bring that to answer your precise question using images and audio data that you fed it. So it really starts to take the shape of a co-pilot to amplify your latent biological powers.
So would I be wrong in thinking that the actual device itself that clips onto your glasses is really acting as a communications point between it and your platform, that's then basically using third party? So you don't have to build it yourself. You're just tapping into the best of the breed. And I guess like a Lego set in a way, to say, okay, use case, this use case, this is going to use this, this, and this. That use case is going to use this, this, and this. Is that kind of the way the architecture should look in my head? This episode is sponsored by 3P Legal. I've been a customer of Peter North as my lawyer, and now 3P Legal for over a decade. Peter and his team are friendly and approachable, which takes the stress out of having to navigate the complexities of legal business matters. Whether starting a business, buying or selling a business, handling contracts or estate planning, their personalised attention and quality of work is second to none. Find Peter and his team at www.3pcorp.com.au or email pnorth@3plegal.com.au if you need commercial or personal legal services, particularly if you're a startup.
At the high level, you can kind of say, so our devices are really just a bunch of sensors,
right,
and some compute packed into a very tight form factor that you wear, and they experience your life as you experience your life.
Yes, because it's the presentation. It's the presentation layer, really. Yeah, so it's this new type of UX.
Yep, it's capturing and it's presenting. There's a bit of processing that happens on the device.
Okay.
In terms of the images, the audio, the movement data that it captures, and then it sends that over to any one of a range of models. And the software we've written off device, it kind of acts like Grand Central Station,
right,
where it routes, to, hey, your intention is to make this kind of query, or your intention is to access this kind of information. So it will route you to the right model. Now, under the hood, there's a lot more going on in terms of how we'll process that data, how we most efficiently make use of the output from one model and feed that into a second model to really get the most accurate or the fastest response. So there's a lot of innovation under the hood there. It's not as simple as, I wish it was as simple as just being able to throw something at someone else's API and then throw the response back at you. But longer term, and maybe this is where you were going, but longer term, we see a lot of strategic value and frankly, sort of customer experience value in this layer in between the device and the cloud-based AI, which is what we call life graph. And that is, going back to, remember I was telling you about, my previous company and notion of graph databases, connected data. The devices are pulling in a lot of rich information about what you see and do and who you're with and where you go. And in a privacy protecting way for your eyes only, we can take all of that data and structure it as a graph, only accessible and viewable by you and your device. And that means that it can track over time who you are, what you're interested in. And so your AI can deliver increasingly personalized responses to you. So that is sort of this middle layer of insight, a growing body of data that no large, well, with the exception of folks like Facebook and Google who've been mining this data in terms of our direct web usage, no device company has this about us. And for us, we don't have an ad model that's going to mine this data for someone else's benefit. We'll spin up a server instance, it'll sit there, and we will literally give you the keys. So we ourselves won't even have access to this. But we think it's a really valuable part of the stack that we can contribute to in addition to the device itself. And that means that your interactions with an artificial intelligence over time will be that much more personalized. It'll know you, it'll understand you. It'll appreciate that, hey, last week you had a very stressful interaction at work, and this week, here's a different way, a different tack you can take with that colleague or with your manager. Or we know that you're a vegetarian, and when you walk into this restaurant, we highly recommend sticking with this part of the menu and doubling down on this ingredient in this dish because this morning for breakfast you didn't have your B12 vitamins, or whatever it
must
might
be able
So,
to pick up bio data as well. That's not normally the thing on your wrist or whatever. At the risk of sounding flippant, sometimes the simplest ones are the best. I'm terrible with names. I mean, I'll remember yours now, but generally if I meet a Fred or a Mike or Kathy, very quickly I go, just simply to walk into a networking event and go, oh, that's so and so. That would be great. and where I last met them, and whatever.
You probably guess we get this, this all the time. That this sort of a universal human problem, it seems, and I have the same problem where meet someone and literally the next moment I'm kicking myself because I've already forgotten their name, and you want to know the context around who they are and mutual contacts that contacts you might have with them and where you've seen them before. But I'll even take it a step further and say, at a certain point, in this digital age, I think the distance between people, between neighbors, has grown, and there's even an epidemic of loneliness that I think afflicts many societies. Devices like this, I believe, can also play a role not just in helping us remember a familiar face or remember someone we just met, but even nudge us to have a serendipitous interaction with someone new.
Right.
And I don't know how that should look yet, but I have this sort of gut feeling that if smartphone played an indelible and very unfortunate role in creating wedges between us, like just enough, sort of screens to drive us apart and decrease the number of warm interactions between us, I think the next generation of computing will do the opposite if designed right, if designed with that intention, and that's certainly something that we have.
I think I think that's a great vision for it. I hope you're right. I'm thinking now more from the business point of view. So you've delivered to your first cohort of customers. You've got your first customers. So how's that going? And what's the business model? How are you pricing that? Because obviously you've got infrastructure. You've got to keep running for the thing to work. So if you pay a couple $100 for it, that's probably not enough to keep, I'm guessing. So how are you doing that?
Well, the cool thing about zeroing in on a more focused use case is that, we found that when we worked backward from those early days, the product that we were able to design and deliver around that was a dramatically simpler and more focused device that used off-the-shelf components. Oops, I just wanted to.
Yeah, that's Otter's dropped out. My subscription, they must have changed their terms because normally, I'd get a bazillion hours a month, so I have to follow up on that. I'll just
Okay.
cracking on.
Okay. Okay. Um, did you want to do like any kind of sound check on your end or anything, or all good?
No,
Should we keep
no,
going?
no, we're all good. We're all good. I've got, yeah, no, all good.
Okay. Cool. Um, so we found that when you start with the use case and work backward from there, in other words, you endeavor not to deliver, in our case, console grade graphics in front of someone's eyes the way that other companies had been doing it, but instead you really double down on a cloud-based intelligence as a co-pilot in your life. The device we found can be dramatically simpler. You can use a lot of off-the-shelf components. You don't need to be in 10 years spending lots of money on fundamental R&D. And so we have about 60% margin for every device sold. And we're a startup, so that's at low volumes. And as we all know, economies of scale kick in when volumes increase. So you've got more negotiating power with your vendors, with your key suppliers. And so that picture is only going to look better. Um, One of the things that we had, the goals in mind that we had when we launched Monocle about a year ago, was that we wanted to focus on unit economics. This is our first device to market, so we really wanted to get unit economics right. So making sure that yields across every stage of production were 90% or above, and that we were sticking to that 60% margin per unit, regardless of what stage of the cycle we were selling. So that was number one, and we've been able to accomplish that. Um, so we're on sort of firm footing as a company. The second is we just wanted to make sure that the industry and sort of our little niche of the technology world came to appreciate that you could do an AR device in a different way, that it could be AI focused as opposed to sort of heavy graphics focused, and that there might be more utility there. So we wanted to just, even in our own little small way, plant a flag in the ground and have and perhaps outsized impact through that on how the rest of the industry thought about these devices. And so none of those two things are contingent upon volume,
Right.
because we're a small team. We wanted to have a high degree of control over our costs so that we didn't, the train didn't start to run away from us. We were always in control of the speed of that train. And so those were our two priorities this year. And maybe a third was no inventory. So we've been able to accomplish all three.
No inventory in terms of. So let me ask a stupid question. So I'm assuming you've contracted a manufacturer, or are you doing the manufacturing yourself?
No, I mean, hey, one day I'd love for us to have our own, Tesla has their gigafactory, right? I'd love to be able to do our own manufacturing in-house. That'd be great. But no, we work very closely with a key contract manufacturer. In fact, a couple of strategic suppliers, but especially one. They mold our optics. They do the final assembly of the device. They're called Movion Technologies. They're based in Singapore, and they're also a multi sort of time investor in the company. So they've invested over multiple. Yeah. So that was something that early on I knew we needed, because hardware is hard. It's costly, and we needed to be able to stretch every dollar to become $5 or $10. And we needed to keep our team small, but augment our own capabilities, our own kind of core design and engineering capabilities with an extended team that can prototype, that can develop, that could quickly translate what's designed and prototyped into what's production ready. And also, we just needed an alignment of sort of intellectual property protection, and we found that in Movion as our key supplier there. So strategically, it's worked out really well for us. And so with Monocle, like positive unit economics, consistently positive yields that are like in that right range that a hardware company needs to stay profitable. No inventory, so it means that everything we make, we sell, and we've been able to sort of get a pretty finely honed sort of sense of supply demand there and how those curves line up. And then we've been able to positively influence, I think, how a lot of people in the industry begin to think about this. So, we've had coverage, all organic, coverage, inbound coverage in like Bloomberg, Forbes, TechCrunch, some of the usual suspects in tech. And, all of that coverage and even our marketing has been organic. We haven't done any paid marketing. So we don't spend on ads. We don't buy demand. So we knew that if we could emerge with, this kind of a picture after a year of sales of our first device, then we would have a pretty good foundation upon which to grow. And we definitely have achieved that. So
what's the
yeah,
business model? Are you thinking you're going to distribute through resellers or retailers, or are you doing it all online? I guess the opportunity to do it all online, and also I'll circle back to my question around how do people do they buy a subscription and pay for the hardware, or how do you do that?
yeah. Well, today it's one-off purchases of hardware, so there's no subscription, but there's a heavy caveat there because we're starting to spin up an increasing number of AI services, and that stuff is not cheap, especially if it's a vision-based model. We will likely, we haven't announced anything concrete yet, but we will likely spin up a subscription service, sort of a monthly recurring model on top of the hardware sale.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it'll look perhaps similar to what we're familiar with from Apple, where they'll sell us an iPhone and then there will be a monthly recurring subscription to like iCloud or Apple TV or any one of a range of services that they offer. So our business model will start to look like that as well. And then to your earlier question, yeah, we sell everything direct from our website. So we don't go through distributors. We don't sell through Amazon. People just come direct to brilliant.xyz. They click the buy button and we ship to them within that day or the next day.
Anywhere in the world, or
anywhere in the world, which isn't under sanctions. So anywhere in the world where we can sell. So yeah, I mean, we've got customers everywhere. Australia, got a lot of customers there. Our customers, as you might guess, they tend to skew heaviest toward the US. There's like a heavy early adopter culture there, especially in Silicon Valley, New York. A lot of folks in the Washington State, sort of Seattle area. Microsoft, Facebook, Reality Labs are up there, so we've got a lot of customers there. And then yeah, EU and across Germany, the UK, broader EU, we've got a fair number of customers there, and Japan. We were surprised because we don't have any Japanese language stuff, at least not yet. And from the very little that I understand about Japan, it's that it's a country that really requires a lot of sort of specialized knowledge, specialized access to local partners, and things need to be in the local language, and just heavy localization around all the marketing. And yeah, at least in terms of the customers that have come our way, it's been a significant number from Japan who've purchased Monocle, and we haven't done any localized marketing there. So that also told us something. That was very interesting.
Wait, what does your average customer look like? Is it a male, female? I'm assuming it's male, but and is it your more engineering, geeky type people, or is it kind of?
Yeah, it's Monocle's open source and hackable nature, and just the form factor itself. We're sort of a little tongue in cheek about it, like, hey, be a cyborg, and like hack the AI experience in front of your eyes. We're very, we're not trying to do the hard sell and convince people that like this is how everyone ought to look. But this might just be your most useful AR workbench tool. So it skews, heavily developer. But it's interesting. It's not just sort of independent, hackers and developers. It's a lot of students and researchers. So a lot of folks in universities and research centers have purchased Monocles for research purpose. And then a lot of small and even large business, so enterprise, they've purchased a number of units to do proof of concept development with the aim of rolling a solution out within the company. So, I mean, that's been very interesting.
So you've got a development, it's like a development program, so I can buy the SDK, I can develop something on it, and you potentially could put it on your platform and deliver that to the broader community?
So right now, we really rely on just direct distribution of people's own software.
Right.
So, if you are, the internal development unit of a large company, and you guys write software that you want to roll out, let's say it's for people doing field repair of certain technical equipment. You would write that software, you would battle test it internally, get executive buy-in, all that good stuff. And then once it's the green light, you buy a bunch of Monocle units from us
Right.
and directly load your software onto those units. It's all
Oh,
over
okay.
the air. Yeah, it's all over the air, field upgradable with a smartphone,
Right.
and anyone's smart. As long as they have our app downloaded, they can just tap a button, and over Bluetooth, your Monocle is updated with the latest software that you want to update it with.
Mm.
So they can contribute that directly to their own workforce. No need to go through us.
I'm imagining, I mean, the obvious pathway forward is it becomes a contact lens and just goes straight onto your eye. I'm guessing, like you don't have to be Einstein to work that out. Um, uh,
Yeah, well, I mean, contact lens paired with some of the stuff that Elon Musk is working on, right? And
I was
Neuralink,
just going to
where it's like,
say, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Yeah, it's yeah, very, very, very interesting. I was going to mention him earlier in terms of his approach to manufacturing. Or I guess to you. I'm probably going to misquote you here. We were talking about kind of the masses of money going into R&D and expectation that something innovative will come out. I recently read his biography that was written by a gentleman, I forget his name. It was extraordinary that his approach was very much physics based and rather than standards based. So, he talked about 6 bolts on the Tesla. He goes, why? Well, that's the industry standard. Well, why? Oh, because of the physics when the car hits, it's going to do X, Y, and Z. So he just did the math and he went, well, we only need three bolts or whatever it was. We don't need 6. And here's why. So with his start, with his rockets, rather than spend X amount of billion getting it 95% perfect to get people blow up the first one, 20% chance it was going to succeed. The next one, 40% chance it was going to succeed, blew up again. The third one blew up. It was hoping that was going to be, and then the fourth one was successful. But he did it cheaper than the Boeings and the NASAs of the world did it because they had covered all their risks and they just applied standards that were engineering standards that weren't necessarily based on truth or the reality because the risk reality was so far further out on the horizon, and he just tested until he got it right. And did crazy things like, they were thinking about using carbon fiber or whatever it was, and he said he used stainless steel. It's like, what do you do? Well, yeah, it works,
yeah,
So,
yeah. There's something about that first principles approach to thinking that, and we admire it a lot. We try to employ it where we can, and it's a constant exercise in inculcating one's thinking to employ it, not only in terms of physical product development, but even in terms of just problem solving, process design, use case identification. So like why ought something exist in someone's life? Really getting down to the nuts and bolts of what life is, how one identifies, how we relate to each other, what our motivations are in terms of what we want out of life and want to contribute back to the world. So, we really, in terms of first principles, tried to start with that on sort of the social psychology side of things. Dare I say the spiritual side of things, but that extends, of course, to the physics of it. And in our world, consumer electronics, a great example of this is all these data sheets that people need to deal with when they're looking at an individual component, let alone wiring things together as a whole system. And to do anything worthwhile, it's got to be low power, highly miniaturized. It's got to be fast. It's got to be able to do amazing things on the device, et cetera, right? Otherwise, anyone could do it, and it would be the size of a refrigerator.
yeah.
Right. So, right. And so to innovate, there's sort of like you reach this point where, and we were kind of laughing about this in the early days with Monocle. Like you're literally, these vendors would sell you like a little microchip and you're served with like 100 pages of the accompanying data sheet. And we're just reading through this and we're like, this was written more by lawyers than it was by engineers. And the engineers that contributed were coached by the lawyers.
Right.
They were told, no, like that. No, keep the parameters, the tolerancing has to be this, it can't be that, or, so, so we needed to take some of that first principles type of inquiry that I think Elon just espouses beautifully in his various companies and really question why. And just, when you sort of realize that, oh, wow, okay, this was the lawyer, this wasn't because it makes engineering sense.
Yeah.
You learn to sort of sidestep certain things and try something. You learn to prototype in disregard of the data sheet.
Right.
because there might just be genius at the end of that rabbit hole.
Sure.
So yeah, it's a great
Can,
example.
I meant to ask a little bit earlier. I wanted to ask about your patent. How important was your patent? I don't know what your patent's for. I haven't had time to have a look at it. But probably two questions. Was it important? Doesn't that kind of open up your robe to the world, and you show them what you're doing? You could have gone the path of the trade secret sort of path with regards to this. What was your thinking there, and was it worthwhile?
Yeah, I mean, hey, we'll find out. I mean, the patent system is it's a whole conversation, but and I think a couple of months ago we saw a company called Massimo. They were in the news, tussling with Apple over patents and Apple Watch and that whole thing. So I think that exposed a lot of the ugliness of the patent process and patent disputes. Um, Patents are useful in that, the way that I look at it, they're useful in that they help to plant a flag in the ground. They contribute to how you substantiate the value of what you've done and the value of the company. Maybe you're acquired one day as a company, and the patents, the portfolio of patents contribute there. So we now have actually, I mean, beyond that one that I think you might be referencing that we published on LinkedIn, we now have like a whole portfolio of I think it's close to 24 patents now that cover a range of electronics, artificial intelligence, mechanical optics. So we've been pretty vigilant in terms of patenting whatever we can, but we're also under no illusion that that's like a definitive moat in terms of innovation.
No.
That in this day and age, especially, innovation like is only useful if you're thoughtful, if you're quick, and if you execute. And your front foot has always got to be faster than people can copy your back foot.
Right.
And in fact, that was part of what I learned by just observing how Apple approached the first iPod. If you remember, there were a lot of MP3 players and CD players, and then Apple did the iPod. And then there were a bunch that, Microsoft chiefly with the Zune, but there were a bunch of companies that tried to copy Apple. And Apple, the pace of innovation there, they patented the hell out of that thing, as they usually do. But every 6 months or 9 months, they had a new iPod to market. And the leaps of innovation, miniaturization, thinness, increased storage, full color, video playback, like in a couple of years, it was astounding how they'd evolved that product. And the copycats were only ever as fast, barely as Apple's back foot.
Right.
And so that sort of taught me, like, wow, okay, they've patented, but that they don't define innovation in those terms.
Right.
That it's about how you push your team. It's about how you think big and how you execute consistently to continue delivering value to the end customer and move the industry forward through that. So yeah, that may be a long-winded way of saying, like, yeah, we've got a bunch of patents. I'm really, really proud of what we patented. I'm like terribly excited, especially at the intersection of AI and hardware. We've got a few patents there that are like super cool, but like we don't rest on our laurels because of it, and we don't see that as a definitive moat for innovation.
Well, it sounds like it's also kind of in your DNA, your cultural DNA. I'm imagining your company is with a bunch of people who, I guess, involved with a bunch of people unafraid to kind of speak up and question things. So, and that gives you that velocity that you need to stay ahead of the game, mate. I think that's a good place to stop it. Perhaps you would like to let any listeners know how to get in touch with you if they want to buy the product, if they want to get involved in other ways.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I mean, this has been a fun conversation. If you want to find out more about Brilliant Labs, we're at www.brilliant.xyz. You can purchase Monocle direct from the site, or at the very least, learn more about us. And stay tuned for an exciting product launch announcement that we've got in the coming weeks.
Fantastic. Bobak, thank you so much. Good luck with the next stage. We'll be keeping an eye on you. You're welcome to reach out again in a year or so and check us in on how things are going. I'll be watching with interest. And all the best then to you and your family, mate.
Thanks so much, Peter.
Okay, so that was my conversation with Bobak from Brilliant Labs. Please feel free to reach out to him if you are interested in what he's doing. I really enjoyed that conversation. He's a very interesting guy, and I think there's going to be more of him and his company to see in the future. For now, Thank you. Take care, and I'll catch you next time.